All right, so let's talk about more specific areas of identity development, and starting with ethnic identity. Now, this is defined as sense of self as a member of a particular ethnic group. And this includes the feelings and attitudes related to being a member of that group. And this should be a recap from middle childhood, but we're going to go into more detail about this today, particularly talking about bicultural identity. So ethnic identity formation can be especially challenging for ethnic minority and immigrant youth. So they're experiencing what we can call bicultural stress. This is the stress associated with negotiating two different cultures simultaneously. So dealing with conflicting values and beliefs between their family, their household ethnic culture, and the majority culture in society, this can be a really big source of stress, navigating these very different beliefs, values, practices. For example, let's say someone immigrated, a child or adolescent immigrates from China to the US. So their family, household, ethnic culture is the Chinese culture, right? And then the society around them is US culture, very westernized, right? So very different beliefs and values and practices and traditions. So they're being pulled in two different directions, and that's a source of stress, navigating and balancing these things. Other sources of stress are prejudice, discrimination, also barriers to educational and economic opportunities. So just some things to consider in this picture of bicultural identity. Now, we're going to look deeper into this now. How do adolescents form a coherent identity as members of more than one cultural background? In other words, bicultural identity. So we're going to explore the patterns of how teenagers identify with both their ethnic heritage culture and the majority culture. So John Barry, he proposed that there are two dimensions of bicultural identity development. You see them here in white. So we have enculturation. This is it refers to how a person's ethnic heritage culture is maintained. And then we have acculturation. So this refers to how a person participates in the larger society and the majority culture. So again, looking at ethnic heritage culture versus majority culture. So by using these two dimensions, we can classify adolescents into four possible ethnic identity statuses, which we'll talk about here. So the purple boxes represent the level of identification with either majority or ethnic heritage culture. And then the orange boxes in the middle are the identity statuses as a result, just to paint a picture of how this works. So let's talk about all four. And as we go along, I want you to think about where you feel like you identify with as an adolescent compared to now. Has it changed? Has it stayed the same? Why do you think that you identified in one of these particular statuses? And maybe I also want to acknowledge that maybe some of us can't really relate to this idea of bicultural identity. It's possible that some of us, our ethnic heritage culture aligned with the majority culture. So they didn't really have to grapple with this bicultural stress and identity. That's possible too. But either way, please tune in and try and relate this to your own experiences or maybe someone you know. So first of all, we have integration. And this is what we would call a bicultural identity, a truly bicultural identity, because it's balancing the two cultures in a healthy, balanced way. So as you can see, we have upwards arrow on both. So high identification with majority culture and high identification with ethnic heritage culture. So it'd be called integration. So they're integrating the two cultures into their identity. They strongly identify with both ethnic heritage and majority cultures. Now, this is associated with higher self-esteem and general well-being, as we can see on the side here. So integration also creates lower risk for things like depression and anxiety for many ethnic minority groups. Now, moving to the right, we have next assimilation. So these are adolescents who identify strongly with the majority culture, but feel disconnected from their ethnic heritage culture. So this is something we may have heard of before. Assimilation, I've noticed, is a term that's used more frequently nowadays. And maybe this applied to us as adolescents or even currently. So identifying strongly with, let's say, US culture, but feeling disconnected from your ethnic heritage culture at home. Separation. So as this implies, these folks are somewhat separated from the majority culture. So they identify strongly with their ethnic heritage culture, but they have little attachment to the majority culture society around them. So that would be separation. And lastly, we have marginalization. So they don't really identify with either with the majority or ethnic heritage culture. They feel very little connection to either. And research has shown these individuals sometimes describe themselves as feeling somewhat lost, feeling like they don't really belong to any particular culture. That would be marginalization. So I hope you were able to think about the difference of maybe when you were a child or adolescent, which one applied to you compared to now as an adult, to help me kind of understand these better. Because I realize this is a bit of a dense framework to walk through, but thank you for sticking along. Now we have one more area of identity development or identity status to talk about. So sexual identity. This is an individual's sense of self in terms of their sexual attractions, desires, and behaviors. So developing a sexual identity can be particularly complicated for sexual minority youth, meaning those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. Same-sex attractions are usually acknowledged pretty early in life, around 8 to 9 years old. But officially identifying oneself as gay, bisexual, etc. usually does not occur until later, like between 14 to 21. So beginning of high school up into emerging adulthood, we usually don't see official identification with sexual orientation. So, but it is acknowledged pretty early, as I said, around 8 to 9. So in elementary school, it's already being acknowledged, but it's just that there is not official identification until later. There's a number of factors for that. So clearly, adolescence is a key time for developing sexual orientation. Now, sexual minority youth face many challenges, like, but not limited to, social stigma, oppression, and even threats to their physical safety. And they're at an especially high risk for things like depression and suicide. So there's some very serious risks and social stigmas out there towards sexual minority youth. And as a result, it can be very difficult and scary to accept and disclose their sexual orientation, especially to those closest to them, their family members, their close friends. They might carry this deep fear of being met with rejection in some way. And it's completely valid because of all those social stigmas we talked about, oppression and possible threats. So parents' reactions is very important. So when a teenager discloses their sexual orientation, some folks call it coming out, a parent's reaction will make a big difference in their overall well-being. So can greatly impact their mental health and well-being. So if parents are providing support and warmth and acceptance and encouraging their child's distinct identity, research shows that many of those risks we talked about, depression, suicide, can be reduced and subsided. So very important to be met with acceptance and support, kind of like this letter here from a mom to a child who has recently disclosed their sexual orientation. You can see they're saying, I love you unconditionally. I'm proud of you. The only thing concerns me is the number of empty soda cups and tea bottles in your room. So they even, are lightening the mood with some jokes. So this is an example of supportive, warm, accepting parent. When their child does such a big step as disclosing their sexual orientation. So that is our last area of identity development. So thank you for sticking along this whole time in identity. And we have another half of the day is going to be on adolescent emotions, which is another big part of the teenage experience. So that's where we're headed. Thank you for joining, everyone, and I will see you there.